folks, so I'm back to work on this Audi front bumper here. And like I mentioned before, the previous owner of this vehicle took the bumper off and decided it would be a good idea to paint it with the spray cans. Why? So the previous paint job obviously was poor, and it was pitting and it wasn't sticking properly. Well, it was pretty awful. I showed it to you in the previous video, so if you haven't seen that, go take a look. It's kind of like a horror movie. What I've done so far is scrape and sand all of the paint off of the metal area around the outside, and I've also sanded all of this plastic. Now there were some runs, I sanded those out obviously, otherwise they would show through the next paint job. And I've scuffed as much of the plastic as I possibly could so that my next paint job will stick. The metal, there was some pitting there. I had to scrape it and grind it down a little bit, try and get it as smooth as I could without going through it. It's actually just a very thin bit of metal. There's just more plastic underneath that. And then I sanded it. So what I'm going to do now is spray some Adhesion Promoter on all of the plastic surfaces. I'll get it on the metal too. It won't hurt anything. It'll probably help, in fact. But yeah, I want to make sure that things bond correctly to this plastic. Once I've got the Adhesion Promoter on there, that really doesn't take long to dry. Then I'm going to go over the whole thing with two coats of primer. And then I'm going to let that cure. I'm going to let that dry for at least 24 hours. Come back, take a look at it, make sure everything's smooth, the pitting's gone and everything. If it's not, I'll sand that back because I'm using sandable primer, and possibly prime it again. But we'll take a look at it after that first coat of primer and assess it from there. So here we go, the grill is primed, and it's had a couple days to dry, or harden or cure, or whatever you want to call it. So now I need to sand this primer. What I'm going to do is it's a bit of a tedious process because of the shape of this thing. You kind of got to get into all the nooks and crannies. So I'm going to go over this whole thing with 600 grit paper to prepare it for my paint. And in the areas around things where it's difficult to sand, I'm going to do the same thing I would when I'm sanding clear coat to prepare to paint something. I'm going to take a Scotch pad, or Scotch Brite, or whatever, the scuff pads, and try and push them in and get into all those areas. Now, I do use typically a waterborne acrylic, even for stuff like this, because it's automotive paint. And because it's waterborne, I will not use steel wool for any of this. That's very important. Don't use steel wool on something when you're going to be spraying waterborne or water-based paints over it, because the steel wool tends to have little particles break off, and it's really difficult to clean them all off. And the issue here is if you get your water-based paint on there, it's going to rust. I of course mean steel wool particles of rust, not your paint. If you can get your paint to rust, I'd like to see that. Anyway, to make a long story endless, I'm going to sand down the grill, get it all scuffed up and ready for paint. I'll do that off camera. There's no point in you watching me sand something. You could watch paint dry if you want. That'd be about as interesting. And as soon as I've got that done, we'll come back and start actually painting the thing. That might actually be worth watching. So on a piece like this, where there are a lot of small areas that you need to get into, sometimes it's easier to use a smaller paint gun, as you will have seen me do. And also occasionally it becomes necessary to turn your fan pattern all the way down, or close to all the way down, in order to kind of guide your paint into those areas. Just make sure if you're turning your fan pattern down that you account for that with your air regulator, because as you go to turn that down, it actually gives you more air coming through a smaller area. Alright guys, we've reached the clear coating stage of our paint job now. So this is where the difference between a proper spray gun paint job and a rattle can paint job, or spray can, or whatever you want to call it, becomes very apparent. Someone who's skilled with spray cans can generally do a decent job of the color on a paint job, but they're not going to be able to emulate the amount of product that comes out of a paint gun and the way that it comes out properly in general in order to get the high quality finish that you're looking for. Also, it's very difficult to find the right kind of paint in a spray can. There are very few catalyzed polyurethanes, for example, automotive clear coats, available in spray can format. What we're using here is a two-part automotive paint that's going to harden and be much more durable than your standard 1K aerosol clear coat. So that being said, it's time to bust out your chemistry set and get to work on mixing this. Just kidding. Anyway, for this particular paint, the TPG Value Pro line that I'm using, the mixing ratio is 4:1, which is 4 parts of the standard clear coat and 1 part hardener. Make sure you read your tech data sheet. Not all clear coat is the same. Some have reducers, some don't. Others have different mixing ratios. Don't just assume that what I'm doing is going to work for you. Get out your measuring cup, and for this kind of paint, make sure you have a respirator. It's also recommended that you wear gloves. In fact, it's recommended that you wear basically something that covers your entire body. This stuff is really bad for you. If it gets in your lungs, it'll harden there, and it sticks to pretty much everything. So it feels like you've been covered in hairspray when you're done using it. I'm going to be wearing a respirator for the mixing and obviously for the spraying, so I won't be able to talk to you anyway. If you'd like to watch the mixing process and the spraying process, I do have a couple videos that include that. I believe part 6 of my original How to Paint Your Guitar series and part 3 of my How to Paint Your Snowboard series both include clear coating, essentially. I don't like to video it because it gets everywhere, it can wreck the camera, and I haven't yet built the Lexan enclosure that I want to for the camera so that I can film that properly. So basically, check out the other videos if you want to see this, but I'm going to do it off camera and we'll come back for the polishing. Well, here's our finished bumper. I ended up polishing this off camera because honestly it was a ton of work sanding in between all these things and, you know, buffing them out and everything, so I kind of had to do it between things. I didn't really get the opportunity to film it. But I've got tons of videos on polishing, so if you're interested, just take a look at those. Anyway, this is all settled now, nice and shiny, and there's pretty much no evidence of the horror that it was before. So hopefully the customer likes it, and yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please subscribe for other painting tutorials and stuff of that nature. Have a good one.